Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakens. Most people will travel thousands of miles to escape the one journey that truly matters, the journey inward. Carl Jung warned us of this long before social media, long before identity became performance. He knew that we don't suffer from a lack of goals. We suffer from a lack of self. Let me guess. You've climbed career ladders, swiped through dating apps, collected Instagram-worthy experiences, and assembled a life that looks suspiciously like success. You've done everything society's bizarre instruction manual suggested, yet somehow, that existential emptiness keeps sending you 3 a.m. notifications that you desperately try to ignore. Don't worry. You're not broken. You're just playing someone else's game while your actual life waits patiently in the wings. Carl Jung, psychiatrist, mystic, and humanity's reluctant tour guide to the unconscious, would look at our modern predicament and probably chuckle. Not because he's cruel, but because he witnessed this same pattern a century ago, just with fewer selfies and better hats. Jung understood something we've collectively invested billions trying to forget. That true life, authentic, vibrant, meaningful existence, begins only when you find yourself. Not the carefully curated persona you present at dinner parties or the professional mask you wear at work, but the raw, unfiltered you that exists beneath the performance. But I know myself perfectly well, I hear you protest, thumbing through another self-help book promising transformation in 5 easy payments. Jung's ghost raises a skeptical eyebrow. The uncomfortable truth. Most of us are strangers to ourselves. We've outsourced our identities to algorithms, entrusted our values to influencers, and confused accumulation with actualization. We know our coffee preferences with religious precision, but couldn't articulate our deepest fears or truest desires if our Instagram engagement depended on it. What a peculiar magic trick we've performed, to be simultaneously the magician, the audience, and the person who's disappeared. Before we continue this journey, I should warn you, Jung's path isn't lined with inspirational quotes on sunset backgrounds. It's more like spelunking through your own psychological cave system without proper lighting, occasionally bumping into stalagmites of repressed memories and stalactites of unrealized potential. But here's the promise that has survived a century of psychological fads. On the other side of this journey waits the one thing no amount of external validation can provide: a life that finally feels like your own. Are you ready to begin? Or would you prefer another decade of collecting experiences that look better than they feel? Part 2. The Persona Paradox. Jung would have had an absolute field day with social media. Imagine him scrolling through Instagram, watching millions of people carefully constructing digital personas while their actual selves atrophy from neglect. The persona, he might sigh, has become the person. One of Jung's most penetrating insights was his concept of the persona, the social mask we wear to meet the demands of society. Think of it as your psychological LinkedIn profile, carefully curated, strategically emphasized, and perpetually optimized for maximum social acceptability. There's nothing inherently wrong with having a persona. It's a necessary social lubricant. The problem arises when you forget you're wearing a mask and it fuses to your face. Or worse, when you've worn so many masks for so long that you can no longer locate your actual features beneath them. But my carefully constructed persona has earned me respect, success, and 12,000 followers. You protest. Jung nods sympathetically before dropping the bomb. Yes, but they don't follow you. They follow the advertisement of you. The persona paradox is this: the more successfully you perform your social role, the further you may drift from your authentic self. The promotion you earned by being professional, translation, suppressing your actual personality, now demands an even more constricting performance. The relationship you secured by being chill, translation, hiding your legitimate needs, now requires perpetual self-abandonment for maintenance. Jung observed this phenomenon in his wealthy, accomplished, and thoroughly miserable patients. They had achieved everything society promised would bring fulfillment, yet they arrived at his office spiritually bankrupt, suffering from what he termed modern man's spiritual problem. Let's be honest, we've elevated persona crafting to an Olympic sport. We maintain different versions of ourselves across multiple platforms with the exhausting precision of international spies. The corporate self, the parent self, the dating app self, the high school reunion self, each with its own carefully modulated voice, curated opinions, and acceptable emotional range. Meanwhile, beneath this virtuoso performance of selfhood, your actual self sits in the dark, wondering if it will ever be invited to participate in its own life. Jung wasn't suggesting we all abandon our social roles and start expressing every random impulse, though your next family holiday dinner might be more interesting if you did. Rather, he was inviting us to recognize the difference between the roles we play and the self who plays them. Because here's the twist that Jung understood better than anyone. Finding yourself isn't about adding something new, it's about removing the accumulated layers of who you aren't. Part 3. The shadow knows what you pretend doesn't exist. If you believe you're entirely the good, rational, enlightened person you present to the world, Jung has some news that might ruin your day. You're not. None of us are. Meet your shadow, Jung's term for the repository of everything you've disowned, denied, repressed, and rejected about yourself. It's essentially the psychological junk drawer where you've stashed all the qualities, impulses, and emotions that didn't fit your self-image or social requirements. Think you're never angry. Your shadow knows about the rage you've bottled. Believe you're always generous. Your shadow remembers every selfish thought you've denied. Consider yourself rational and fair-minded. Your shadow has catalogued every prejudice you've refused to acknowledge. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply everything you've decided isn't you. And in one of life's more twisted jokes, the more vehemently you deny these aspects of yourself, the more power they gain over your life. But I've worked very hard to be a good person, you might protest. Why would I want to acknowledge my pettiness, aggression, or selfishness? Jung's answer was both simple and revolutionary. Because what you don't own owns you. Every quality you refuse to recognize in yourself doesn't disappear. It goes underground, emerging in moments when your conscious control slips. Ever found yourself overreacting to someone with a fury that seemed disproportionate? Or felt inexplicably triggered by someone whose crime was simply embodying a quality you've disowned in yourself? That's your shadow, sending postcards from the psychological basement. The most fascinating part? We're remarkably skilled at spotting in others exactly what we refuse to see in ourselves. That colleague whose arrogance drives you crazy, that friend whose neediness exhausts you, that public figure whose hypocrisy infuriates you. They've all been kind enough to display the very qualities you're working overtime to suppress in yourself. Your perception is your projection might sound like a cheesy Instagram quote, but Jung recognized it as profound psychological truth. The qualities that trigger us most intensely in others are often the ones we're most dedicated to denying in ourselves. In one of history's great cosmic jokes, the people who most vehemently claim to have no shadow are typically the ones most thoroughly possessed by it. The moral crusader who rails against sexual impropriety before being caught in precisely such a scandal. The anti-corruption politician with offshore accounts. The wellness guru preaching balance while privately burning out. Jung wasn't suggesting we celebrate our darker impulses or act on every urge. His revolutionary insight was that acknowledging these aspects doesn't strengthen them. It allows us to integrate them consciously rather than have them sabotage us unconsciously. The shadow isn't going anywhere. The question is whether you'll get to know it on your terms or be ambushed by it at the least convenient moments of your life. Part 4. The uncomfortable alchemy of individuation. If finding yourself sounds like a pleasant weekend activity involving spa treatments and inspirational TED Talks, Jung would like a word. The process he called individuation, becoming who you truly are, is less spa day and more psychological marathon through terrain that would make ultra-runners weep. Individuation isn't self-improvement, it's self-confrontation. It's not about becoming a better version of your current self. It's about discovering that your current self is largely a collection of adaptations, compromises, and borrowed identities that have little to do with your authentic nature. "But I've spent years building this identity," you protest. "I have the career, the aesthetic, the carefully calibrated political opinions. Are you saying that's not really me?" Jung's response would be characteristically gentle but uncompromising. What would remain if you lost everything that you didn't create yourself? Ouch. Individuation begins with a disturbing recognition. Much of what you consider you was installed by parents, educators, peer groups, and cultural programming before you had any say in the matter. Your values, beliefs, preferences, and ambitions, how many did you consciously choose, and how many did you absorb from your environment like a psychological sponge? This isn't a pleasant realization. In fact, it often arrives as what Jung called the midlife crisis. That moment when the life you've dutifully constructed suddenly feels like someone else's architecture that you've been maintaining at the cost of your own soul. The first half of life, Jung observed, is necessarily about adapting to external expectations, learning the rules, building competence, establishing yourself in society. But the second half must be about something deeper, discovering and expressing your authentic self, even when it contradicts the identity you've spent decades constructing. This is where individuation gets messy. It requires questioning everything you've taken for granted about yourself. It means facing the parts of yourself you've rejected and the potential you've abandoned. It demands differentiating between the voice of society inside your head and the quieter voice of your authentic nature. And here's where Jung's path diverges dramatically from our quick-fix culture. Individuation isn't something you accomplish in a weekend workshop or through a 30-day challenge. It's not a destination, but a continuous process of psychological integration that unfolds over a lifetime. So what's the point, you might reasonably ask, if I never completely arrive? Jung's answer speaks to something deeper than our achievement-oriented mindset can readily grasp. The point isn't to finish the journey, but to be transformed by it. Each step toward greater authenticity, each shadow aspect integrated, each projection reclaimed, these don't just change what you know about yourself. They change the quality of your existence. Because life lived from the authentic self, even imperfectly, has a different texture than life lived from the persona. It carries a vitality, a depth, and a meaning that no external achievement can provide. Part 5. Synchronicity. When the universe gets personal. Just when you think Jung's psychology couldn't get any more mind-bending, he introduces a concept that makes quantum physics look straightforward: synchronicity. Defined as meaningful coincidences, synchronicity refers to those uncanny moments when the external world seems to reflect your internal state with such precision that it feels like the universe has suddenly broken the fourth wall and started communicating directly with you. That book that falls off the shelf with exactly the message you needed. The chance encounter that changes the trajectory of your life. The symbol that keeps appearing during a significant life transition. The dream that contains information you couldn't possibly know consciously. Modern rationalists dismiss such experiences as mere coincidence or selective attention. Jung, with characteristic intellectual courage, proposed something far more radical: that these moments reveal a connection between psyche and matter that our materialist worldview cannot accommodate. The meeting of two personalities, Jung wrote, is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. He might have said the same about the meeting of inner and outer reality in moments of synchronicity. Something is transformed when subjective meaning and objective event align with uncanny precision. This isn't about seeing Jesus in your breakfast toast or thinking the universe cares about your promotion. Jung was pointing to something more subtle. That meaning doesn't just exist in our heads, but can manifest in the arrangement of events in ways that defy conventional causality. If this sounds like mystical nonsense, you're in good company. Jung's concept of synchronicity has been dismissed by hardcore materialists and embraced by New Age enthusiasts with equal fervor, both missing his actual point with impressive consistency. Jung wasn't suggesting that the universe revolves around our personal dramas. Rather, he was proposing that the sharp division we've created between objective reality and subjective experience might not be as absolute as our post-enlightenment minds assume. The fascinating thing about synchronicity is that it tends to cluster around periods of significant psychological transformation. Almost as if the boundary between inner and outer reality becomes more permeable when we're in the process of becoming more authentically ourselves. But this sounds dangerously close to magical thinking, you protest, clutching your rationality like a security blanket. Perhaps. But Jung would gently suggest that our insistence on a completely desacralized, mechanistic universe might itself be a psychological defense against the terror and wonder of existence. Sometimes what we call being rational is actually being afraid. Afraid of a universe more mysterious, more responsive, and more alive with meaning than our control-seeking minds can comfortably accept. Whether you embrace synchronicity as a metaphysical principle or simply as a psychological phenomenon, Jung's insight remains powerful. Paying attention to these moments of meaningful coincidence can reveal connections between your conscious intentions and unconscious development that might otherwise remain invisible. In a world determined to reduce everything to algorithm and data, synchronicity stands as a reminder that meaning cannot be quantified, only experienced. And that sometimes the universe does indeed speak in a language meant just for you. Part 6. The Alchemy of Opposites. If there's one thing Jung understood better than perhaps anyone, it's that psychological growth doesn't occur through pursuing perfection, but through embracing contradiction. The alchemical transformation of the self happens not by becoming more consistently good, but by integrating opposing forces within the psyche. Modern self-help culture, with its relentless positivity and promise of frictionless self-improvement, would have horrified Jung. He knew that authentic development occurs precisely through the tension of opposites. Light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, rational and intuitive. But shouldn't I be striving to overcome my negative qualities, you ask, highlighting passages in yet another book, promising to eliminate all your flaws? Jung's answer would be both compassionate and challenging. What you call negative may contain precisely the energy you need for wholeness. Consider the qualities you've been taught to reject. Anger can become boundary-setting strength. Selfishness can transform into healthy self-regard. Doubt can develop into discernment. The question isn't how to eliminate these energies, but how to integrate them consciously so they serve rather than sabotage your development. Jung called this process holding the tension of opposites, the psychological capacity to experience contradictory aspects of yourself without immediately trying to resolve the discomfort by suppressing one side of the equation. This isn't easy in a culture that worships consistency and certainty. We want to be one thing, not many. We prefer simple narratives to complex truths. We're uncomfortable with ambiguity, especially within ourselves. Yet Jung observed that the most psychologically developed individuals weren't those who had eliminated their contradictions, but those who had learned to hold them in conscious relationship, creating a dynamic tension that generated energy rather than depleting it. The corporate executive who honors both their analytical mind and their intuitive wisdom. the parent who embraces both nurturing softness and firm boundary setting, the artist who integrates both disciplined technique and chaotic inspiration. This capacity isn't just psychologically healthy, it's creatively powerful. Jung noted that all creative acts emerge from the tension between opposing forces within the psyche. Remove the tension, and you remove the spark that generates new possibilities. Perhaps the most important opposition we must learn to hold is between who we are and who we're becoming, between acceptance of our current reality and aspiration toward greater wholeness. Jung called this the transcendent function, the psyche's natural tendency to create a third position that transcends seemingly irreconcilable opposites. This isn't about finding a lukewarm middle ground. It's about allowing the full energetic charge of both poles to remain active within you, creating a dynamic field from which something new can emerge, something that couldn't have been predicted from either position alone. In your journey toward finding yourself, the goal isn't to eliminate parts of who you are, but to bring them into more conscious relationship, allowing even your contradictions to become sources of vitality rather than confusion. Part 7. The courage to be yourself. After all this talk of shadows and personas, unconscious projections and psychological integration, we arrive at the simple yet profound heart of Jung's message. Life begins when you find the courage to be yourself. Not the self that was expected or demanded. Not the self that brings the most likes or advancement. Not the self that fits most comfortably into society's ready-made categories. But the self that emerges when you stop running from your depths and start embracing the fullness of who you are. But what if people don't like the real me, you ask, voicing humanity's oldest fear? Jung's answer cuts through centuries of anxiety. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Notice he calls it a privilege, not a burden. Because despite the challenges of this journey, the shadow work, the persona dismantling, the holding of opposites, Jung understood that authentic selfhood is the greatest gift we can give ourselves and the world. The irony? Most of us spend our lives terrified of rejection for being who we really are, while simultaneously exhausting ourselves trying to maintain identities that were never truly ours to begin with. We sacrifice authenticity for acceptance, only to discover that what's accepted isn't actually us. Jung witnessed this pattern in his patients, successful, accomplished individuals who had climbed to the top of society's ladder only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. They had achieved everything they were told would bring fulfillment, yet they arrived at his office suffering from a peculiar modern malady, lives that looked perfect on paper but felt empty in experience. The journey toward authentic selfhood isn't about becoming someone new. It's about having the courage to express what has always been there beneath the adaptations, the compromises, and the performances. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself that you abandoned along the way in your quest for belonging and security. And here's the beautiful paradox Jung discovered. The more fully you become yourself, the more deeply you can connect with others. Authentic selfhood doesn't isolate you. It creates the possibility for genuine rather than performative relationship. This is the ultimate promise of Jung's psychology. Not that you'll become perfect or free from suffering, but that you'll become real, capable of experiencing life with a depth and richness that no amount of external validation can provide. In a world increasingly engineered to turn us into predictable data points and passive consumers, the revolutionary act is to become the one thing algorithms can't replicate. A fully individuated human being, embracing both light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, known and unknown aspects of the self. Life doesn't begin when you've eliminated all your flaws or achieved all your goals. It doesn't begin when you've finally gained everyone's approval or accumulated enough external markers of success. Life begins at that precise moment when you make the courageous decision to stop running from yourself and start the greatest adventure of all, the journey toward becoming who you truly are. If this exploration of Jung's psychology has awakened something within you, remember that intellectual understanding is just the beginning. The real work happens not in concepts but in lived experience, in the daily practice of becoming more conscious of your patterns, more accepting of your shadows, more authentic in your expression. Follow this channel for our continuing journey through history's most transformative psychological and philosophical insights. Next week, we'll be exploring Frankl's search for meaning and how finding purpose may be the key to transcending suffering. Subscribe now to join a community dedicated to the art of becoming, because in a world obsessed with optimization, the radical choice is wholeness. Your journey toward authentic selfhood is just beginning, and Jung's insights are merely the first constellations in a sky filled with possibilities for transformation.